there are so many music documentaries that just do the same thing over and over and over. And I just never want to watch them. They always just have like the same four dudes being like, I've been changing my life. When I put that record on, it was like, whoa. I just didn't want to make that movie. I didn't want someone else to make that movie about Earth.
Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hello, my name is Clyde Petersen. I'm a filmmaker from the Pacific Northwest in the United States, and I recently finished a film with the band Earth. It's called Even Hell Has Its Heroes.
And Clyde, in addition to being a filmmaker and an animator, you yourself are a musician.
Yeah, I actually met Earth through a series of connections in Seattle music scene, and I play music in two bands. One's called Your Heartbreaks and one is called Mandate. And Your Heartbreaks and Earth share a keyboard player, Steve Moore.
Would you say that your music, either Your Heartbreaks or Mandate, belong to a specific style or a specific genre?
I would say Your Heartbreaks falls into the indie songwriter category, and Mandate, it tends to be like a bit harder to listen to. It's like more like the irritating years of a Sonic Youth record or something. A little bit more dissonant than not. Yeah.
I think on this podcast, the irritating years of Sonic Youth are probably the favorite ones.
Great. Fantastic. Yeah. Mandate plays. We play like punk music that's pretty dissonant. So
We like dissonance on this podcast.
that's good. I like it too.
You mentioned Steve Moore. Among the other collaborators that you've had over the years, actually were Dylan Carlson and Adrian Davies from Earth. Would you mind telling us a little bit about how you met them?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. I moved to Seattle as a teenager in the 90s and just started playing music, and the music scene is pretty small. You know, there's a lot of people in the Northwest, but there's not so many musicians. So if you're traveling in a certain kind of show space zone, you'll eventually cross paths with a lot of different folks playing a lot of different interesting music. And I was working as a roadie and a tour manager, and a band I was working for, Steve Moore, was in it. And we just became really good friends. We had to drive vans across the country together to pick up, bands and gear. And so throughout the years, we just developed this strong friendship. And at some point, I was looking for work, and Steve had just joined Earth during the hibernaculum phase. And he was like, "We need help. Like, we have this record. It's called The Bees Made Honey in the Lion's Skull, and we need help. So, do you want to come meet Dylan and Adrian? And maybe you could be our manager." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, sure." So we met up at the donut shop. It was really late at night. We were all kind of night owls, and I don't know, we just got along really well. And so I started working for them, and I managed them for 5 years. So that's kind of our friendship origin story.
And living in Seattle, were you aware of Earth? Were you familiar with their music? Did you know Dylan as like a guy in town, a guy that people spoke about in terms of his music?
I was not aware of Earth at that time. I was just kind of living in a pretty different world of music. The I was like living in the indie rock world, and I think I'm 12 years younger than Dylan, 12 or 15 years younger than them. So we kind of weren't crossing paths in that way. But as soon as we did cross paths, it became very clear that we knew just tons of people in common and had been orbiting each other for a really long time already. But yeah.
As far as your work as their tour manager, what appealed to you about Earth? Why did you want to work with them?
Well, that's a good question. It was just like such a different world than I had ever been a part of. Like being invited into, I guess, Earth's atmosphere was like a strange new world. And I wasn't super conscious at the time of instrumental music and like how impactful it can be on your mind. And I had just been working so much with singer songwriters. It was just such a like wonderful shift. It was also really fun to like be invited into the metal world. And I found out that like this whole scene was really, in my experience, very kind, which was so nice to find out. Like, I am a pretty dorky, like, sweet human. And like to be welcomed into like a scene that plays very, like, generally speaking, harsh and loud music, you know, you don't really know what to expect. But I think that what I found is like the bond among metalheads is like often feeling like an outsider. And so myself also feeling like an outsider, I was like, "Oh, I like it here. It's very strange and wonderful." And in terms of just Earth, like I would have to say that we all are pretty nerdy people. We just like read books and listen to strange jazz records and like talking about weird Chris Christopherson songs and stuff. So it was kind of just such like a welcoming place to find a space for myself. So that was kind of, I don't know, the general feeling at the beginning of it. Also, they were like really analog creatures, and I am too. So it was like really easy to fall into that place where they didn't have cell phones or laptops or anything. They had an answering machine still. So like call and talk on the answering machine for long periods of time until they picked up the phone. Kind of just felt familiar and really nice. So yeah.
As an aside, before we start speaking about your film and animation work, I'm somebody who speaks to metalheads. I mean, I'm a lifelong dirtbag hesher, and I speak to metalheads who write incredibly fast and serious music about like demons and religion and war and that kind of stuff. But I'm also speaking to guys who, and it's usually guys, but I'm also speaking to guys who have a similar background as far as like Dungeons and Dragons and comic books and Star Trek and stuff like that.
Absolutely. I was definitely a Magic the Gathering kid. Like ra- raised in Seattle, home of Magic the Gathering. Perfect timing for my youth. So Earth is definitely a Dungeons and Dragons band. They definitely had a game going for many years. So that was something that I really wanted to film for the movie and didn't get to. But in my mind, there is a scene where they're playing D&D.
I mean, a Dungeons and Dragons game soundtracked to Earth. I think that's a whole movie on its own, right?
It's true. Yeah. I do watch like all these new fantasy films coming out. I'm always like, they could have had Earth in the soundtrack. You know,
Yeah.
seemed like the obvious choice.
I'd like to speak about your work as a filmmaker a little bit. You've done both documentary films and you're an animator as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your animation work?
Yeah, absolutely. I came to filmmaking through several different routes. Studied documentary in college, and then as soon as I finished school, I just hopped in a tour van and was out on the road, working, playing music, roadieing, tour managing, and then eventually managing. But the whole time I had my camera with me or a Super 8 camera with me, and I would shoot music videos on tour just for fun. There was no intention of like a business side of it. It's definitely just a passion. And eventually, some bands saw these videos I was shooting, mostly on my Super 8 camera, and they were like, "Oh, can we use it as a music video?" You know, sure, yeah. I was just doing it for fun. So I was able to start making music videos for bands, and at some point I came back to Seattle after being on tour for like 7 years, and I was like, I should put to use my film knowledge in a real life environment. So I started working at this post production house, which was a terrible fit for me. It was a really really bad fit. I was not good at like checking the addresses on Benbridge jeweler ads for 100 mall locations for a diamond ad. And next door, my friend Britta Johnson was an animator working at a different production house. And we would both be working late, and I would be checking the addresses on the Benbridge jeweler ads or like cleaning up coffee cups. And she would be like setting things on fire or animating dancing eggs.
Setting
Or
things
like,
on fire on purpose, right? Like not like she wasn't bad at using computers.
yeah. And I would be like, I would be like, are you okay next door? And she'd be like, everything's fine, everything's fine. And I was like, it smells like fire. And she's like, it's okay. So I started to just go over there after work and I started to learn how to animate from her. She was is a fantastic animator. And I was like, oh, this is clearly the fun thing that's happening. So I did some production assistant work with her and then was like, oh, I could transition this into music video work pretty easily. So I just started making music videos and it just, all of my time in the music world just like translated to that. Like, oh, I can make videos for friends for pretty cheap. So that's kind of like what got the ball rolling. Eventually I was working for a record label called Kill Rock Stars for a few years, just making music videos like as a full-time job, which was extremely fun. And at some point in there I decided to make like my first feature animated film, and then I kind of became addicted to feature films and the format of like long storytelling. So yeah, that's like the nutshell of my filmmaking life.
I used to do motion graphics professionally just for like social media and stuff like that. I have done a little bit of hand drawn animation, and when I say hand drawn, I
Cool.
mean still on the computer, but frame by frame, drawing the frames out. Animation is incredibly fulfilling when it's done, but while you're doing it, it can be incredibly tedious. I don't know if you have that same feeling.
Yeah. I mean, over and over, I just say this just takes forever. But I really love slow things, which is probably why I love Earth. I love a patient, slow task. If I could do everything in slow motion, I would, which is very contrary to the world at this point. But yeah, I
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that. And in terms of your animation, you were doing a lot of stop motion, right?
yeah, not as much hand drawn for sure. I just did a hand drawn project and was felt overwhelmed by it. I made a music video that was like 2 minutes long and it took 4 months to draw. And I was like, yeah, this is why I don't do this. But it was a good experiment. I mostly do like cut paper, or I'm working on a music video right now for this band called R Ring, which is like Kelly Deal's other band when she's not in the Breeders. And it is, I'm trying out Stratacut, which is like patterned clay, and it's really fun. You use like kind of Rubik's Cube-esque mathematical formulas to stack clay, and then you slice through it, and it creates this deeply satisfying pattern when it works. So
When it works.
yeah, when it works, when it's broken, it's disappointing.
So I spoke with someone who did a documentary about grindcore, about the style of music,
Cool.
and he is a documentary filmmaker by profession, I believe. And what he said was that as a filmmaker, he's always looking for a subject that hasn't been explored before or hasn't been explored in some depth. But at the same time, he was also a lifelong fan of the music, who owned like thousands of records. So clearly, he was coming from a place of, you know, extreme interest and love in making a film about grindcore. I'm wondering, when you got the idea of doing a film about Earth, who you knew quite well, what the impetus was. Why did you feel like this was a subject that you wanted to explore and wanted to share with the world?
Yeah, there were some moments when I was working with Earth. In particular, there was kind of this time period when Dylan was really sick, and we were on this tour, and it was a tour with Lori Goldston, and we were just both like really worried. We were just like, Dylan is really sick right now, and I don't know. Honestly, we just like thought he was gonna die. We were like, man. And
Was this in like 2018? He had some kind of liver.
yeah, it was all about his liver. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was just like, we just were like, huh, this is a little bit intense, and in a way where you're like, oh, my friend is really sick and we're on tour, or this is, the thing. So there were like these moments when I just kept thinking, someone should make a movie about this band, just as a fan and as a friend, like, and also like just knowing their past experience in film around Kurt's death and around like the exploitation of that, and how it really like made them be like, no, absolutely not. We're not going to appear in film. And there was this moment, Dylan was sick. And then there were, just other moments watching them live so many times and thinking, God, this is so beautiful. It just would be great to capture some of this. And the real turning point was like Earth helped soundtrack my first feature film. And we premiered that at the Egyptian in Seattle. It was really fun. It was like a 600-person beautiful old theater. We had a 24-person band and that was like a 10-person choir and 14 musicians doing a live score. And like Mel Detmer running sound, who's like one of the sound engineers that Earth has worked with so many times, and pretty big version of Earth playing and My Band Your Heartbreak's playing. And like at the end of that movie, I just remember like Dylan was like in tears and he was like, let's make a movie. And I was like, yes, this is awesome. Because I'd kind of retired from Earth to like make this film. And also it just felt like the right time to kind of just like pass them on to a bigger manager. And so kind of just like a lot of things cumulatively adding up to, I think, us both being in a place where we could like trust each other enough and make like a weird art film about a weird art band. And just I think there are so many music documentaries that just do the same thing over and over and over, and I just never want to watch them. They always just have like the same four dudes being like, "A band changed my life. When I put that record on, it was like, whoa." I just didn't want to make that movie. I didn't want someone else to make that movie about Earth. Like someone else still can make that movie about Earth, you know? But I just felt like I had an opportunity and a time and a space to hit the road with them and film when I wasn't like tour managing, selling the merch, doing all this stuff. Like I was like, oh, I don't work for you anymore. I can just film you constantly. So yeah, that's how this weird film kind of came to be.
listening to this podcast has probably seen like the documentary with the talking heads and, you know, intercut with like footage, like news footage or whatever. And then, you know, Chuck Klosterman shows up or Henry Rollins shows up or Dave Grohl shows up. And, you know, it's a mix of like interviews with the band members cut with like, you know, outsiders giving context or whatever. And this isn't that film. This is the interesting thing about the way that you handle this film is, I mean, of the many interesting things about the way you handle this film is that there are interviews with several members of Earth, many people who've gone through the band, as well as like, you know, producers, label heads, things like that. And there's footage of some of those people, but the footage isn't of the interview. Like, this isn't a talking heads kind of documentary. This isn't behind the music.
Yeah. I mean, at its heart, this movie is like, I don't know if you've seen the film Gates of Heaven by Errol Morris, but it's a movie about a pet cemetery. And there is a scene where one of the sons who owns the pet cemetery goes up on a hill with his guitar amp and he just plays guitar licks and they echo over the valley of the pet cemetery. And I just like, ever since I saw that scene, I was like, this is the most glorious scene in a film I've ever seen. Like, what is this? What is this hippie doing standing on a hill in California playing Jimi Hendrix-esque riffs over a pet cemetery? And it just really, it's like in my heart, that shot. So, you know, when I thought about making a film with Earth, like, I was like, it's going to be like that. I'm going to take the Northwest and I'm going to make it a character in this film because it's a huge part of our lives living in the Northwest. All these people, they're all affected by the weather and the like insular nature of, you know, hiding in your home for 9 months of the year. And I don't know, it just affects everyone up here so much. So I wanted to like elevate the Northwest as the primary character of the film. And to do that, I thought about all of the different wildly beautiful locations that we have here. And then I would take one band member to a wild location, like the Stonehenge recreation on the Columbia River Basin. And I would like make him play music there and film him. Or I took Jonas Haskins to Rattlesnake Lake, which is a beautiful lake just miles from the town Twin Peaks was shot in. And it's just one of my favorite lakes, but I had never been in there in the winter. And I took him up there and I was like stunned because the water had receded so far away. We had to like haul this dinghy like over the mud for like an hour to get to the water. And then I made him like row a dinghy out into the lake with oars made of electric guitars that had been donated. And I know this all sounds vaguely abstract at this point on a podcast, but
I'm glad that you brought it up because if you didn't, I would. That is my favorite scene in the whole movie. And, you know, the whole thing is almost like a little 3-act play where he's at the lake with the canoe and he's got the 2 guitars that are tied to oars.
Yeah.
And in your head, you're doing the math, right? Like, you know, two guitars, canoe, lake. Is he gonna get into the canoe with the guitars and then row with the guitars? But the whole thing is, you know, first he creates a landing, and I think he actually stumbles a little bit, right? And it almost looks like at some point he's gonna fall into the water.
Yeah, I mean, it's all just documentary. I thought he was gonna go in too.
It's like David Attenborough, right? Like you can't interfere. You just have to set up your camera and watch.
Yeah.
And then when he gets into the canoe and starts rowing with the guitars, it's almost like a Kids in the Hall sketch. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's almost like this very absurdist, surreal, very funny moment where you're like, who is this guy and what is he doing? Like, I feel like there's a whole movie about Jonas Haskins, rowing. The movie intercut with like Jonas Haskins rowing to like different locations, and
Yeah,
he just shows up
yeah,
with his canoe.
absolutely. I mean, each of these like scenes is very intentional. Like Steve Moore at Stonehenge, Steve is a math music nerd. He is deep in it. He can like draw sound for you in many different mathematical shapes and equations. So like Stonehenge is a perfect fit for him. And that was like a really epic trip. He had been on tour for like months with this band from Sweden. We picked him up in Portland after their last show at like 2:30 in the morning. He slept for like an hour in a hotel room, and then we drove him to catch the sunrise on the Columbia River. And it was a brutal shoot for all of us. Like we drove down from Seattle, we slept for like an hour. He was off tour and slept for like an hour, and then we drove a couple hours along the river and to get there before the sun rose to shoot. And
One of the interesting aspects about these scenes is that some of them were actually soundtracked by those members. Like they contributed music for their scenes.
yeah, it was so fun to make this soundtrack. I wanted the project to be as collaborative as possible without like putting the weight of production on them. So I basically handled the filming. And I mean, the whole approach was just like to let Earth tell their own story, like however they wanted to tell it, like, which is not necessarily like a traditional documentary approach, but I don't necessarily love a traditional documentary. So we shot film for like 2.5 years on and off. And again, this is like a passion project. So it wasn't every day. We would just, choose a weekend, go out with one person, and we'd often be driving like a few hours. So, that would kind of be the shoot for the day or for the week. Or we'd organize a show. We did a launch show at the Crocodile, and Dylan had like every local member of Earth come and play on a song. And it was really fun. It was chronologically kind of presented. It was so sweet. And that was kind of like the beginning of soundtracking. Was we did a live recording of this live Earth show. Then we filmed for a couple of years. And after that, I started to rough edit the film together. And I met with Dylan and Adrian and told them, like, okay, we've got kind of like 7 scenes, 7 or 8 like scenes. And here are the themes to them. Like, tour on the West Coast, grunge, Olympia, Aberdeen, like the Olympia Aberdeen years, the Seattle years. So thematically, like they were given kind of an assignment to make music that like represented these time periods or geographic locations. And so they kind of like handled that aspect of the soundtrack. And then we all went to Mel Detmer's studio in West Seattle, and they worked with Mel for about a week recording that music. During that time, we also brought in like individuals who were featured in the film to make their own soundtrack for their section of the film, because I wanted to be like really representative of each person and like what they bring individually to Earth, because Earth is very, very much like, well, it's very much Dylan and Adrian's project. It's also very much a collective of musicians, and it's deeply influenced by like what each person brings to the band. And you see that shifting throughout the years. And so like just inviting that in one more time was really magical in lots of ways. Like I think like one of the highlights is for me is Angelina Baldos's soundtracking. She brought in like a trumpet and a bowl of water and a delay pedal and a bass guitar with like 2 strings or something. And just sat in the control room with Mel, and we were like, what's about to happen? And she made this gorgeous looped atmospheric piece, which is like so completely her style and so abstract. And that's like, where she comes from. She doesn't really come from like the roots of a trained musician. She comes from a very experimental place. So like, just like, I don't actually identify like as a great musician or a great filmmaker by any means. I think my skill set is actually like understanding and acknowledging different people's strengths and just like stepping back and letting them shine and like serving as a placeholder for those people to do what they do best and like making space for it. I think that's actually my craft. So
Yeah.
it's really fun.
Yeah. But there's an aspect of that too, to great filmmakers. Like, I mean, not everyone is, you know, Stanley Kubrick yelling at you to do something 220 times until he gets the performance he wants.
Sure.
You know, like Scorsese is incredibly collaborative to the point where, you know, large portions of the scenes are just improvised, and it's just his actors, his characters interacting with his mom because he thinks that would be funny. He thinks it would be interesting to see what happens when he throws his mom into the mix. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, as far as the soundtrack goes, you know, soundtracks for documentaries, especially music documentaries, can be tricky because the music rights are tied up with a lot of different companies, especially a band like
Mm-hmm.
Earth that's been around for 30 years. Even if the band members are on board with the documentary and you know the labels are on board with the documentary, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can get the rights to the music. Was it difficult at all to secure some of these songs?
We actually very intentionally approached it as a brand new album to avoid this exact issue. And so I was like, well, wouldn't it be so great if we walked away with a brand new Earth record at the same time? And so that's what you get with the film is a entirely new Earth record, with the exception of a live version of Bees Made Honey in the Lion's Skull. Yeah, it was very intentional to avoid any issues with securing rights. But I feel like it's just a bonus prize to have a whole new Earth record. And also like this kind of ties back to traditional music documentaries. Like I I want to watch a film and be left with a lot of questions and then get to do my own research and get to I want it to be more like a door opening instead of like you see the whole room and then you leave the room and you saw what you just need to see or whatever. That's not a great metaphor, but
Well, it does feel like a documentary for fans of the band Earth. Like, I don't know if people who aren't familiar with the band will, you know, will walk away from this documentary understanding more about Earth and why they're so seminal in you know certain types of music and within that scene. But definitely as a fan of the band, it was interesting to see hear from the record label who originally put out the album, or you know a lot of the collaborators and their experiences with Dylan. I mean, I can say as a fan of the band, I and I have spoken to Dylan on this podcast before. We spoke in 2019,
nice.
and you know, as a fan of the band, there's always been this mystery around Earth, and part of it is them being an instrumental band who make this incredibly avant kind of metal and never really fit in one scene or another. And Dylan himself is kind of a almost like an outlaw musician kind of character. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so watching the documentary and having his friends or his collaborators talk about him as a redneck, talk about him as a nerd, it was like seeing the other side of this guy who I only know from his ominous album cover photos and his incredibly ominous long drawn out songs.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that. I don't know what people will think if they watch this movie and don't know about Earth because I don't have the opportunity to like be a person experiencing that. I think that this movie is like for musicians for sure. Like it's a 2-hour film about people talking specifically about playing music and what it means to them individually to play music and play collectively. And it does get into like some real detailed minutia about that. And so if you're a person that is used to a different kind of film and wanting a different kind of scene, it might not be for you. But I want it to be like for people who are interested in going further. And like once they leave the theater, they like go and they look up the band and they learn more and they start listening. You know, I just want it to be like this little bit of an entryway into, like, for newbies, an entryway, but for fans, just like another layer on revealed. I definitely think it's like the film is a time capsule in many ways. It doesn't, there's a lot of like early drama with this band that it doesn't go into for a number of reasons. Like some people did not want to be interviewed. And I definitely like want to acknowledge that like some people like don't want to go back in time to times that were potentially like pretty hard and like pretty brutal. Like a lot of people died during grunge. They lost so many friends. And so it's like a pretty emotional journey to go all the way back there and like think about where you came from as a teenager and like all of the people that you lost along the way. So within that scope of the film, like I just tried to make it as much of like a time capsule of what was available. And that's just kind of what translated out of it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've referred to Seattle as being a character in this movie and maybe the main character of this movie. Do you think Earth, a band like Earth, who their music is incredibly uncommercial and was even more so at the very beginning, never really fit into one genre or another, one scene or another. Do you think a band like that could have come out of any other city? Or is there something about Seattle that maybe fostered this kind of iconoclastic kind of music?
I think that we get different versions of this kind of music from different places where the weather makes you stay inside and you have to spend a lot of time being introspective.
Right now, a bunch of people are listening to this in Canada and know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we experience different versions of Earth from different parts of the world, and it just depends on like what those musicians are, you know, exposed to early. And, for this situation, this was like a really specific, you know, conglomeration of humans that like happened to hit at a very explosive time for a very specific kind of music. And they kind of like, you know, crept along in its tailwinds and played the long game.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to say.
I mean, I guess my feeling is, having lived in different parts of the world, it does feel like a scene tends to hammer you into whatever shape already exists. Do you know what I mean? And so, like, there's a certain kind of band that comes from New York. There's a certain kind of band that comes from the Bay Area. And I'm speaking specifically about metal. I don't know about other scenes, but within metal and
Mhm.
hardcore, it does kind of feel like either you're part of the clique and you're doing what everyone else is doing, or you struggle to find places to play, bookers who'll put you on shows, things like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's an ongoing conversation around music for sure.
Yeah, and it feels like Earth were so odd and so out there, but at the same time, everyone else kind of was too. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, actually, this is strangely specific to Seattle in a very certain way, which is Seattle in the late 80s had this law. It was called the Teen Dance Ordinance. And it was this complicated law that came into being by a very long back history, which I could get into, but shouldn't in this time period. It basically made music shows, specifically all ages music shows, incredibly difficult to put on. And so what happened, what we see like geographically is that music shows transitioned from bars and clubs to art galleries. And I think that that had a very significant impact on the kind of like things that were suddenly spotlighted in Seattle during like pre-grunge years. And just like shifting a show to an art gallery does a lot of things and like opens a lot of doors to like potentially some real strangeness. So I think there was like specifically some legislation in this time and place that like caused a shift to like a real door opening to being weird is okay. Being strange is okay. Being an outsider is okay. It's talked about a lot like in other films like Hype and stuff too, like how Seattle like bands just like never came this far north. It wasn't on the map. Like you might go from San Francisco to Portland, but like that's it. And so like there was this whole scene brewing of just like strange kids with guitars, that later exploded into like a massive capitalism wave. But at that time, it was kind of like caused by this like weird pressure cooker of politics.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe less like the environment and more, geographically and more the like political environment in some way.
And now that the political environment has changed, do you notice a change in the music scenes as well? Are you starting to get this kind of homogenization that you see in other cities?
That's a good question. It feels like the internet has definitely like homogenized music in many ways. But I think that there are still weirdos out there everywhere making their, it's like leveled the playing field in some ways for weirdos to make their stuff and be heard further out. Yeah.
I mean, this is a great time to be a weirdo making music because, you know, all you need is a laptop and some kind of line in, and you can have an album on Bandcamp by the end of the week. You know what I mean?
I love it. Yeah. I love all these like strange like noise music tape labels and stuff. It's so awesome. The like pockets that you can surf into and find entire scenes of people like you've just never heard of, and you're just like, what is this? It's fantastic.
I'd like to speak about the look of the film. You mentioned even prior to shooting this film, shooting things on Super 8, which is what this film was shot on, right?
Yeah.
Why Super 8? Why do you like the format?
Well, it's the most affordable of all film formats for sure. That was basically the choice. If I could have afforded to shoot it on 16, I will, but my credit card was like deeply on fire from just super hate.
And when you say film format, you mean specifically film
Mhm.
as opposed to shooting on video?
Yeah, I felt really strongly that like an, a band that loves analog as much as Earth should be shot on an analog format. And it's just like a visual preference of mine most of the time. I don't know. I shoot a lot on digital too, but I think things just look really beautiful on Super 8 film, generally speaking. So, one of my goals for the project, like as a personal goal, was to just get really good at using this camera. I bought a rebuilt, it's called a Beaulieu 4008. There's a company in Burbank that rebuilds them. And it's a French camera and it's beautiful. It has an amazing lens on it. And I just wanted to get really, really good at shooting Super 8. And I think I got medium good at it. I want to go again. I want to make another feature on Super 8 and learn more about light and shadows. But we did a test shoot with it to see how it would look, and it looked really good. I had actually shot a short film with Earth on a tour like 5 years earlier on Super 8, and it just looked so incredible. I was like, oh, this is it. This is our look. So yeah, like I said, I just set my credit card on fire, which it just felt completely off the rails to do it. I was like, I am buying a $3,000 Super 8 camera right now. What am I doing? This seems like a really bad life choice, but I just love it. It's a great camera. So, and then I bought like 40 boxes of film and we did a live show at the Crocodile. And then I hopped in the van with those guys and we went down the coast, and so fun. We ended up like our last show was in LA, and I got to like take the film to the film store in Burbank and then fly home, and that was kind of the beginning of it. But in general, I just have a lot of experience from my 20s shooting Super 8, and I just adore it. You can just hold it in your hand and hold it up to the light and see what you're looking at. Like memory card transfer, chaos, losing files, just physical film. It's a wonderful thing.
And as far as the look of the film, there's a kind of a desaturated look. Is that all from the film stock, or did you do that in post?
We had like a color correction person. I mean, it's actually like probably more saturated than when it started from the original film. I shot on a couple different film stocks. So some things, some film stock for like indoor stuff and then some for bright light outdoors, and kind of just like finding the medium place between those two with the color correctionist is what you're looking at. I tend to love saturated things, and so I always like oversaturate them, and then like 2 days later I'm like, oh god, and I have to rewind and You're like, okay, that just looks crazy. You can't watch that for 2 hours. Like, okay, pull it back towards a more realistic color. But yeah, I just worked with there's a great color correctionist who's like lives out on the Olympic Peninsula, and just mail him a hard drive. He mails it back in a few weeks. It's great.
I mean, the look of the film, and a lot of it is, all the things together, the grain of the Super 8 and the aspect ratio, and the desaturated look, and the way the greens and the blues kind of pop more. It does feel like you're watching old home movies, especially the scenes where you're shooting out of a window of a car or a van, and you're driving. And kind of a recurring theme of the movie is the music scene the way it used to be, Seattle the way it used to be. You mentioned a lot of people not wanting to revisit the past as far as things that had happened, but this film does have kind of a nostalgic feel to it. Do you think that's fair?
Absolutely guilty of nostalgia for sure. I tried super hard not to avoid filming advertisements, contemporary vehicles. Like, I tried to avoid contemporary time for sure in this film. I didn't tell, who was it? Jonathan from Sub Pop. I didn't ask him to wear a shirt without a logo, and he was wearing the Train Spotting shirt, and I was like, oh, it's pretty good. Great choice. If anyone has to wear a logo in this whole shirt, in this whole film, I guess it's going to be a Train Spotting shirt. Yeah, in general, I tried to ask the band to, not wear logos and kind of keep contemporary time stamping out of it as much as possible, which is like, not necessarily easy to do, but.
So you mentioned that you set your credit card on fire
Over
in
and over and over
over and
and
over
over.
in making this movie.
Yeah,
Did you fund this yourself?
I did. I mean, I'm just like a working class person. I like tonight I'm gonna go to work and I work at a screen print t-shirt shop and we make t-shirts and you know, my job is to like stamp the size into the neck of the t-shirt, you know. So if you go to REI this year and you buy a shirt, I probably touched it. But yeah, and I just did a lot of music videos to pay for it. I worked overtime, time and a half for sure to fund this passion project. So I don't recommend it, but for some reason I'm possessed to do that, and I couldn't really see another way to do it. We didn't want to crowdfund it because we didn't want to have like expectations tied to it. And it also felt really important for like myself and for Dylan and Adrian to have complete say over the content and not have like someone who donated to it be able to make changes. That was one of the original agreements for sure. Yeah.
Because if you brought in a producer, the first thing they're going to say is, "Hey, how about we get Dave Grohl to appear in another
Right.
documentary?"
Absolutely. And I mean, no shade to Dave. I would love to have the free time to cut together clips of Dave saying, "This band changed my life. This band rock." I would love to watch a documentary of like the same five dudes saying sound bites like that over and over. That's one of my passion project dreams for the future. But yeah,
I
I
mean,
just wanted to like,
there's so much footage of Henry Rollins saying these guys were intense that I wonder
yes.
if it's just like stock material and you can just like
Oh
buy
my
it and insert it into
gosh.
your film.
I never considered that, but I would like to start that business. And I think that you have just stumbled upon an incredible opportunity. Maybe we can get investors. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we had complete control because there are some really tender moments in the movie. And I wanted to make sure that like the people saying the things were able to like delete them if they needed to, you know, if it didn't feel like the right time to talk about certain things. But yeah, it was really hard. It was very, very, very hard to fund this film. It cost $100,000 to make over 5 years, and I think I make like I don't know $30,000 or $40,000 a year as a person working many different jobs. So like kind of like half my income would go to it every year, and then my credit card bill would get like really scary again. It'd be like I have $30,000 in debt. And I'd be like, it's fine. Just keep working. It's a wild ride.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I spoke to Dylan in 2019 and he mentioned there's going to be a documentary about us probably coming out next year.
Yeah.
And of course, the very next year was 2020 and we all know what happened there.
Yeah.
So it must have been incredibly nerve-wracking to have. I mean, how much of the footage had and how much of the music did you have recorded when the pandemic hit?
Oh my gosh. Thank goodness we had already done the soundtrack. I felt so lucky. We had pushed so hard in 2019 to get so much of it done. I was kind of at the end of production in 2020, chasing these like little like pieces that I hadn't gotten yet, which were far away, like Jody Cox in London. I hadn't gotten to film him. I had emailed with Mark Lanigan about filming him, and then we didn't connect, which was extra unfortunate because he was like, "Yeah, sure." And then also, I was on the trail of Michael McDaniel, who was the drummer for Pentastar, and I had to like do all this detective work. I heard he was teaching yogic drumming in Montana. And so I just started Googling, okay, yoga drummer, healing drums, Montana. And then it just like, I found a clue and it was like, here's this guy. And then suddenly I was like on this yoga studio website and there was his phone number. And I just called him. I was like, are you the drummer from Pentastar? And he was just like, whoa, yes. So, he's just living like in the middle of no, in the really bad cell reception. Like, so I did an interview with him over the phone, but it was just like cutting in and out. We did a couple tries, and I mailed Super 8 cameras to him, and he had a friend film. And then we found a guy in London who had shot a bunch of Tool music videos, and Jody knew him, and that felt like a really good fit. And he actually shot like some of the most gorgeous stuff in the film. And then I was working with this guy Ben Kasalki in LA who shot a bunch of stuff with Dylan. So I was just mailing cameras all over the world for a minute. That was some serious chaos. But yeah.
So at the time that we're having this conversation, the movie has premiered. You premiered it at the Copenhagen International Documentary Film Festival.
It did. It is world premiered, and it's heading into its US premiere coming up in May. So we also have gotten into a bunch of other film fests that aren't announced yet. So it's premiering like globally this year, and we'll be announcing those kind of over the next few weeks and months. So you can keep an eye out for it on our social media and on our website.
So the film is called Even Hell Has Its Heroes.
Yes.
And Clyde?
Yeah.
If people want to know more about the premieres and how to screen the film and possibly order the film, what's the best way to get that information?
We've got all your standard social media routes like Facebook and Instagram, and a very unused Twitter. I'm sorry, I just never got into it. We have like 12 people following us there. It's great. Choose your own adventure on that. And then we have just a actual website that's evenhellhasitsheroes.com. And that's actually probably the very best place for information. And we've also got the soundtrack up for sale on Bandcamp. So you can get that digitally. You can also stream it if you're feeling the crunch of money these days, and just enjoy it.
And do you want to say anything about the physical releases that are going along with the soundtrack?
Oh, yeah. Well, we did a vinyl campaign with Bandcamp. So the test pressings of that just came in, and they sound truly wonderful. And so it's at press right now, and there'll be some copies for sale on the Bandcamp too in the future. And those should be shipping in a few months. And we made a cassette, but it's sold out. But we have another really fun, exciting album coming very soon. So keep an eye on the Bandcamp. It's the Even Hell Has Its Heroes Bandcamp specifically. And we're going to be releasing another cool record on there really soon.
And if people want to follow your work as a filmmaker, how can they do that?
Yeah, I've just got a website too. I guess I'm like kind of an old-fashioned person. I like a website. It's ClydePetersen.com, ClydePetersen.com. And you'll see all kinds of stuff. I make visual art and films and animation, and just kind of lots of goofy experiments over there.
And so we started our conversation talking about Dylan's health and how that led to you wanting to make a film about him. I spoke to Dylan shortly after that, those health issues. But how is he now?
I think he's doing really good. He just he took care of himself. He took himself to the doctor, and yeah, I think he's a lot better. So I don't think he's had the same health issues in a long time, which is really wonderful.
That's great.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say?
Gosh. Well, the sun is setting over here on the Pacific coast. It's looking quite beautiful outside through the forest. And I just want to thank you for having me today. And I hope that anyone who watches the film, I definitely don't have the wish that everyone loves the film. I just hope that if you watch it, you'll find something that you love in it. That's it.
I mean, if nothing else, please watch the segment with the canoe and Joe Haskins.
Yeah. Oh, I will say one more thing. Something we made that's not out yet is that we made an instrumental mix of the soundtrack to have as a visual album on the DVD. So you can like throw it on as like a visual album and just go about your day and enjoy some earth footage while you're listening to the music without having to listen to all the talking too. So that's something I'm really excited about, actually.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Clyde.
Thanks for having me today. I've been a trapper out cruising the tender, the hungry young hustlers in the city of night. And I've been a terror, a fierce younger lover. I've traded my body at times to survive. I'm haunting the hollows, the back alley burrows, the dark movie theaters and discos and dives. If we hovered so nearly together, just barely, felt the wonder between us, what wonder we'd find. Could you count all of those who abandoned the fight? Or list off the names of all those who have died? In the city of night, while the death tolls were raging, the church bells were ringing, but not for our kind. And we're haunting the hollows, the back alley burrows, the dark movie theaters and discos and dimes. If we hovered so nearly together, just barely, felt the wonder between us, what wonder we'd find. So pardon my yearnings, they hit without warning. My heart so commanding, my body, my mind. And all of the secrets that we hold between us, they all shine so clear in that glowing moonlight. We're haunting the hollows, the back alley burrows, the dark movie theaters and discos and dives. If we hovered so nearly together, just barely, felt the wonder between us, what wonder we'd find. If we hovered so nearly together, just barely, felt the wonder between us, dear, what might we find?